LeBron James is a top 2 player of all time, but his dominance has to end soon, leaving it up to his 3 kids, Bronny, Bryce, and Zuri, to uphold his basketball excellence. Bronny was always the one getting the praise, and he has potential, don't get me wrong, but Bryce James is going to be the next basketball legend to come out of the James family. Bryce James rocks rec specs better than any player I've ever seen, but we have to talk about his crazy growth spurt. When he was 14 years old, ESPN had him listed at 5'11", which is already tall for his age group, but then something happened, and 2 years later, he was 6'6", and it's a lanky 6'6". I mean, his legs are long, and overall, he looks even taller than his listed height. And the way that he uses his height is already more impressive than kids his own age. He maneuvers around the basket well, and he can create his own shot very effectively. But we'll talk more about his game later. For now, you have to realize that by the time LeBron got out of high school, he measured 6'7" without shoes, and Bryce is the closest one to that by far. Both LeBron and Bryce have the ability to use their height and weight to get the most out of their game, but unfortunately, Bronny just can't do the same. And I don't care what anybody says, Bronny James is not 6'4". Maybe he's scratching the surface of 6'3", but he's definitely not 6'4", and while this sucks for Bronny, it helps our argument that Bryce is the heir to the throne. This is without mentioning that Bryce is still not done growing, which means he can be even taller than his own father. And while this is also true with Bronny, we just haven't seen the same physical results as Bryce. He's also 3 years older, so it's far more likely that Bryce keeps growing and Bronny stays stagnant. While we're on the topic of age, let's talk about how much experience will help Bryce in his journey to the NBA. Bryce is the youngest James in the family aside from Zuri, and this means that he got to grow up watching his dad and brother hoop all the time. One reason I think this is bound to help his game a ton is because he has had 2 mentors with real basketball experience, and they have paved the way for his basketball excellence. While LeBron doesn't make many mistakes when it comes to basketball, and he came up playing during an entirely different time, Bryce has had Bronny to look up to because they're both around the same age. This means that he watched what Bronny does right and what he does wrong, and he can model his game based on those 2 factors. I think this is an underrated aspect of Bryce's potential because imagine you have LeBron James in one year coaching you up, and then you have Bronny, a player on a premier college basketball team to learn from firsthand. Well, this has been happening for Bryce since a young age, so I think it could have more of an effect than people think. It already shows in his game what he's taken from LeBron with the way he goes through defenses and has certain moves in the bag that aren't normal for a high schooler. But you also have to remember that Bronny James's biggest attributes are his defense and knowledge of the game. And those are 2 underrated aspects of basketball that determine whether or not you're a real hooper. These 3 make an iconic trio with videos like dunk, dunk, dunk.
Can't leave until we make 3 in a row. No, we're not doing dunk, dunk, dunk. Jump, dunk, dunk, dunk. One.
And Bryce's impersonation of LeBron going viral all over socials.
LeBron James, the one and only, the king from Cleveland. How tall you is?
And now we gotta talk about the sibling rivalry. Look, it's no secret that Bronny James has been disappointing this season at USC. His shooting numbers are awful, and overall there's times where he looks a little lost out there on the court. But I'll give him his flowers, his turnover numbers aren't that bad, and he's looked pretty good on defense. We all know that he had a scare in one of USC's earlier practices, and I'm so glad he's all good, but overall this is definitely not an ideal season for him or the James family. I mean, it doesn't help when LeBron has said that he thinks Bronny can play for the Lakers right now, but that clearly isn't the case. Either way, let's tie this all back to Bryce. The fact is that the bar isn't set too high for him right now because of Bronny's struggles, and that's something I always felt bad about. It's tough to try to live up to your father when he's considered by many to be the greatest person to ever touch a basketball, and I think this influenced Bronny a little bit. Like I said before, he still has potential to be a good player and maybe even start for an NBA team, but I think betting on Bryce to be the better brother is a safe one. And I can't talk enough about Bryce's potential. He's a 3-star prospect with multiple D1 offers, which includes Ohio State, which is where I think he'll end up. But the difference between him and Bronny is that I truly think he's getting these offers because the potential is there and they like his physical outlook. Now, I'm not saying that Bronny only got D1 offers because he's LeBron's son, but many people thought that. And I will admit, Bronny on the surface is a less interesting prospect than his brother Bryce. They're both really good at basketball, don't get me wrong, but still, if you look at the outlook, it looks like Bryce has a little bit more potential. All of this comparison stuff means nothing if we don't look into his actual game, so here we go. I mentioned earlier that Bryce James is awesome at getting into the paint, but I think I may have underestimated it by a little bit. You have to remember that he's only 16, which means that in a couple years, he'll definitely add muscle like his father, and this will only increase his paint play. Right now, he's able to shoot layups that other kids would have blocked, and his touch around the basket is phenomenal. So imagine he gets some more muscle and can do this stuff against literally anyone he matches up against. That's a scary sight. But here's another aspect to his game that could be an even bigger factor on how good he is, and that's his shooting. LeBron has said that Bryce is the best natural shooter in the family, and this high of praise means he's doing something shooting right. When you watch the tape, you can see exactly why Bron says this. His form is gorgeous, and he has a quick trigger, which is literally the two things that make you an elite shooter. He obviously makes a lot of threes too, and some of them are not easy shots. Some of them are contested, some of them are off the dribble, and others are from pretty deep if you ask me. He also has some insane athleticism, which is pretty obvious since he's LeBron's son, but it's a huge part of his game. He was able to dunk at 14 when he was barely 6 foot, and now he's added 6 inches, so you better believe he can throw down. Not only does it help him when it comes to dunking, it helps him contort his body for tough shots at the rim, and he has a spinning fade move he does which looks like it can be unstoppable. We haven't even talked about the noise he's made on the AAU circuits, and that's a very important part of his basketball journey so far. AAU is where all the top prospects play nowadays, so the fact that he's performing against some of the best players in the world is insanely impressive. He currently plays for the Strive for Greatness AAU squad with Keon Anthony, Carmelo Anthony's son, and around 8 months ago they did something crazy. They helped SFG drop off another premier AAU team named Phenom United, but this isn't even the best part. Phenom United had 2 5-stars, and honestly they're both considered to be some of the best players in the 2025 class. Darren Peterson and Jalen Harrelson both have 20 offers each to some of the best schools in the world like Kentucky and Duke, so you know they're legit. And Bryce helped them win 74-68. But this wasn't even the toughest battle in his young basketball career, because around the same time Bryce also had to play Cooper Flagg, who's the projected #1 overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft, and he's currently committed to Duke. This game came down to the wire, and believe it or not, Bryce's team actually won 60-58, which is another huge W for the agenda that he's the next James family legend. Now, I'm not saying that Bryce is better than Cooper Flagg, obviously not, but this shows that Bryce James can play great competition and help his team win, which at the end of the day is the most important factor. And if you don't believe me about how good he is, here are some of his testimonials. Nearly 2 years ago, Brian Windhorst was on the Dan Patrick Show, and he reported this.
And when people I talk to don't get that same vibe about Bronny. There are actually people, and I've never seen his younger son Bryce play. There are people who have told me that Bryce actually might be the better prospect amongst the two, but Bryce, I think, is 13 or something like that. I don't know if we can go that far.
This is wild because remember, I said that 2 years ago he was still only 5'11". So that means people were already thinking that he was better than Bronny before he was 6'6" and before he was beating Cooper Flagg in AAU games. That's pretty crazy. Gilbert Arenas also talked about Bryce James, and here's what he had to say.
No matter what we did to Bryce, he read it perfect every single time. He might have lost the ball, but you can see the concept of he knew what he wanted to do. From there, it was just perfecting his dribbling skills.
That's right. Gilbert Arenas said that Bryce is probably the smartest out of the 3 James Hoopers. And keep in mind, that clip was when he trained with him a couple years ago. So that's not even current day Bryce. I'm not gonna lie, from his highlights, the background he has in basketball, the resources available to him, and everything I've heard from people in and around basketball, I think the sky's the limit for Bryce James.